Justice brings you
Top of the morning from beautiful downtown Boston.
My name is Bernard Jennings with J4P Associates, the sponsors of this great 13th annual Black History Month event. Our distinguished guest is a man who can say that he's one of the few attorneys who have played both sides of the legal ball. He was a prosecutor, and now he is a defense counsel. He went to Howard University and then on to law school at William and Mary. And he left high school to go into the Army as an auto mechanic. And he spent time training in France with their equivalent of the Special Forces. And how he got here, he'll tell you all about it. But he comes with the knowledge of the legal system like very few people have. And it's important for especially the young people here to hear his message. There's an issue of violent crime, and then there's the issue of other crimes, and including white-collar crimes. And what he can share with you is his experience on both sides of the legal spectrum. And I can't think of a man more suited to cover this in one body, not two. Typically we would have debates here at Black History Month. We'll have legal system reviews as it relates to HBCUs and racial issues and so forth. But here's a man that has seen both sides of the legal system when it comes to the law as it applies to us as everyday citizens. Oh, there's Councilman Frank Stokes. I just saw him. Robert Stokes, I'm sorry. Frank is Carl's father, I'm sorry. That's a screw up on my part, Robert Stokes. I don't know if they're related, they claim they aren't. So. But anyway, I want you to give a warm welcome, please, to none other than Ivan Bates. Thank you, Mr. Bates. My pleasure.
Good afternoon. I just want to say thank you to everybody coming out. See Councilman Stokes, see all the other dignitaries, see a judge here, two judges. I'm sorry, I see the judges here. But I really also want to say thank you to the students. Some of what I have to talk about today, I really want to direct to you because you are our future. And oftentimes in understanding our future, we have to look back at our past. We have to understand our history. Today I want to give a little bit about nonviolent and violent offenders and what does that mean in the criminal justice system. How does the criminal justice system work? Is this a system that we're just going to lock up everybody, or is this a system that has hope? And what is the purpose of the criminal justice system? For me, it's rather confusing. I know in 1995, I moved to Baltimore, Maryland. Fresh out of law school, William and Mary, and I had a job offer from a judge named David Mitchell. Judge Mitchell operated and did the juvenile division. He was in charge of juvenile division here in the Circuit Court of Baltimore City. I moved to Baltimore basically to take care of my aunt. Her name was Edna Dennison. She lived right up the street. Apartment 6S. In a tall high-rise on the corner Charles Ave, North Ave. And I always remember being here, talking to her, and thinking about what was going on in the city. When I moved here in Baltimore, I was a law clerk. Being a law clerk, you sit there and you help a judge. Your job is to do what the judge needs you to do. And I wanted to be a defense attorney once I stopped being a law clerk. However, one day my aunt was mugged. When she was mugged, I remember receiving a telephone call, and I remember running to help her. I was so afraid, she was afraid, and back then she was 75 years of age. Because my mother had asked me to be the one to help take care of her. She didn't have any brothers. She had a lot of brothers and sisters, but she didn't have any children. At that point in time, I felt like I failed. I wasn't there for her. Eventually, they caught the mugger, and she was able to get her purse back. But I remember seeing the fear in her eyes, and I wanted to do something different. I wanted to do more. So I applied to the Baltimore City State's Attorney's Office in 1995. I was accepted, and I was given a job, and that's where I had the opportunity to meet and work with, here now, Judge Holly Weinstein. It was judges such as her and people such as Judge Weinstein that allowed me to have a foundation to understand the criminal justice system. After I worked in the state's attorney's office for about 6 years, I was in every division: juvenile, district court, circuit court, homicide division. I was sitting down doing a murder case, and I was telling the judge all the positive things about the person charged with murder. They were going to take a plea. And the judge turned to me and said, "Mr. Bates, you appear to be a defense attorney in a prosecutor's suit today." And I said, "Why do you say that?" She says, "Because you're fighting harder for this young man than his own attorney." That opened my eyes. The criminal justice system needs people on both sides who will fight for you. That Judge Wanda Hurd. Yeah. I then became a defense attorney, where I worked with a firm named Shulman, Treem, Chemical, Guild, and Ravenel. I worked with an attorney named Ken Ravenel. We had a case that went before the United States Supreme Court. And as an attorney, that's the pinnacle of our law profession. Very few attorneys ever have a case before the U.S. Supreme Court. I remember sitting there watching the judges. It was one of the last cases that Judge Connor, the first female judge in the Supreme Court ever heard. I remember staring at her because for me, my hero was Thurgood Marshall. And for so many other people, their hero was Justice Connor. I remember sitting there looking at her, understanding that I was in the presence of an individual who had given so much to knock down so many doors. And I understood how important understanding the past was. After working with Ken Ravenel, I then started my own firm, Bates & Garcia, and I've had cases all around the country. I've done all types of cases. Some of the cases that people remember me for is I represented a police officer in this case called Silk Road. DEA agents, Bitcoins. The case had me in San Francisco. I learned a lot about the federal system in San Francisco. I also represented Sergeant Alicia White in the Freddie Gray matter. I learned a lot about the police department. I learned a lot about community relations. And many people now view me as the face of the victims in the Gun Trace Task Force. I had about 40 or 50 cases over a 5 or 6 year period where I began to represent individuals just because I would see the name Wayne Jenkins on their charge documents. I would take their cases half price or almost pro bono because I figured out what he was doing and no one would listen to me. So I've seen the criminal justice system in ways that have been good and ways that have been bad. I can understand the difference between a non-violent offender and a violent offender. But to understand the criminal justice system, I have to understand the history. See, right now in America, we talk about mass incarceration. We do have a problem. How do we get to this point of mass incarceration? How do we talk about violent and non-violent offenders? And how do we get out of where we are? And understand the history of incarceration in America. It didn't start here in the United States of America. Unfortunately, the United States of America just perfected the process of incarcerating individuals. We can sit down and see from the early inception of slavery, bringing our ancestors and many people over to America. You always had the chains, that mentality. But in the 1500s, in England, they were using dungeons to lock people up. In the United States of America, we had the Jackson era, and that's when we first started to see a shift from dungeons to, i.e., we're going to lock people up. We need to have some of the labor to do the work that we need to do. And you have the class divisions. We can sit down and see the progressive era. And that's the era within the criminal justice system where they finally say, we're not just going to lock people up, we'll give people parole. We'll give people the opportunity to no longer be indentured servants for everybody. We'll give people the opportunity to maybe have a job. And then that's what the criminal justice system looked like until 1970s. In 1970, Richard Nixon signed bills talking about the criminal justice system, and that's where we have the mess that we have today. There we decided that we were going to incarcerate individuals and basically take them out of society. And taking them out of society wasn't focused on rehabilitation. And it's interesting, the progressive era talked about rehabilitation, but from 1970 on, it didn't. And in 1986 is when a lot of what we have now began to happen. That's when Ronald Reagan, we had the war on drugs. The war on drugs criminalized small amounts of drugs, and that disproportionately affected the African American community, but also the disenfranchised communities. And from the 70s and 80s, we begin to see the breakdown of family structure. We begin to see fathers in jail. We begin to see mothers raising their children alone. And we begin to see jobs leaving the inner city, going out to the suburbs. And the only quote-unquote business that a number of the young children see are the drug dealers on the corner. And once again, because we have the war on drugs, a lot of the drug dealers are now being incarcerated for long periods of time. When we had the war on drugs, we had to do something different. We had to leave a message that drugs were bad. Because remember, in 1986, we have cartels. We have Pablo Escobar. We have the violence that are associated with drugs. We have drugs being brought in by kilos and tons. So that's where you begin to see things on the federal side called mandatory minimums. Those are sentences that the judges will have no discretion and people must receive. For instance, back in the day, if you had less than a half a kilo of cocaine, you would have a mandatory sentence of 10 years. But if you had a prior conviction of a drug offense, then that would enhance to 20, 25. Then if you were with somebody that was part of a drug conspiracy, and you did something very small, for instance, deliver one bag of crack cocaine, that resulted in a sentence of life. We began to see families broken up. Right now in the United States of America, there are 7 million people that every year have contact with the criminal justice system in jail one way or another. What we've done is we've created a system of the haves and have-nots. We've seen a flight from the cities, and we also have seen the war on drugs and criminal justice system decimate African American community. In the United States of America, compared to the rest of the world, we have the highest rate of incarcerated people. For every 100,000 people, 716 or 4 point in Baltimore, 716 people are incarcerated out of every 100,000 people. The United States of America only has 4.4% of the world's population, but yet 22% of the people incarcerated are United States citizens. Think about that for a moment. The United States of America has decided and made, and we've taken incarceration to a new level. So what do? How do we get here? And what are the effects? You can see these policies have had a disproportionate effect on African American communities. What we've seen is that a lot of times, some of the charges, the conspiracy counts, what they've done is they've also entangled families. What they've also done is entangled the mothers of the children. We see the war of crack versus cocaine, and what has that done? Crack cocaine was predominantly in the African American community. Cocaine was predominantly in other communities. The sentences were a lot stiffer for crack cocaine. We look at 28% of all, in the state of Maryland, 28% of African American men are arrested criminally. However, 51% of the jail population to African Americans. Think about those numbers for a second. What the criminal justice system has done is decimated the African American community in so many ways. It's breaking down the family structure that we see. What are we going to do about this, and how do we get from under this? I believe in opportunity. An opportunity, how do we do that? Because first we had to understand history, then we had to understand opportunity. In Maryland right now, 27.9% of the population are African American, but 72.4% of jail population is African American, right here in Maryland. And in Maryland, we have to focus on the Justice Reinvestment Act that in 2016 Governor Hogan signed. That talked about what we're going to do, getting rid of some of the mandatory sentences, focusing on nonviolent offenders, also violent offender. Nonviolent offender, what is that? That's a person who tends to have a property crime. Those are crimes that really don't tend to really injure other individuals. They're not as serious. So what are we going to do? With non-serious individuals, should they still go to jail as long? I would argue and say no, but they still must be held accountable. So what are some of the things that we need to do? We can sit down and give individuals community service. We can sit down and make sure they have job training and placement. Those are just some of the few things that we talk about when looking at nonviolent and violent offenders. However, we have to have a criminal justice system that also leaves a message and says we're going to hold people accountable. Right now in Baltimore City especially, we have violence exploding. What is that from? Some of it's from the economic disadvantage. Some of it's from individuals that just are so hurt they don't care who they hurt. And some of it's from individuals that are so poor in our communities that they just need to do it by any means necessary. But what is this criminal justice system going to do? We have to hold violent offenders accountable. Does that mean we lock up everybody? Well, if you're violent, and you're carrying guns, and you're shooting people, you must be held accountable. And those are the things that we have to make sure our system is able to do. I would argue that when you look at a nonviolent offender, we have to make sure that we can put them in a position so that they don't eventually gravitate and graduate to being a violent offender. We have to give the nonviolent offender the opportunity to understand what's going on. We have to give the nonviolent offender the opportunity to be placed in the community service so that they have the skill set to see people around them who are doing positive things. Whether it's a school, whether it's a church, whether it's a business, a nonviolent offender can walk around. Two of the things that are most important in the city are safe, clean cities. One, the criminal justice system needs to make sure they're safe. And two, the nonviolent offender, that workforce could be used to try to make sure the city can be clean. How? There are programs already through the court system, programs through the police department, programs through the prosecution's office. Programs need to link together and make sure that if you're going to be a nonviolent, if you're going to go ahead and break a window, if you're going to break into a car, I'm going to hold you accountable. And you're going to go back to that community, you're going to clean, you're going to sweep, you're going to do the things to make sure that you understand. The criminal justice system is more than just about locking people up, it's about relationships. A lot of times the individuals that come through the criminal justice system, they don't have the connection to the community. We live in a city right now in a community where we have the have and have-nots. People are neighbors and they don't know each other. Once they have the opportunity to know, once they have the opportunity to be invested, that's when they're willing to make a change in who they are and their actions and their behavior. However, if the nonviolent offender does not understand what's going on and they continue to be, and they eventually become violent, then they must be held accountable. So, now that we understand we have an opportunity to make a change, we have to have a plan to make this change. One of the things that I suggest, the first thing we do is we go down to the legislature and tell them there's some drugs that you're prosecuting that we have to decriminalize. But the legislature must be the individuals that will do this. For instance, let's look at the marijuana situation that we're here in the city. With marijuana, there are a lot of people that want to decriminalize marijuana. I, for one, believe in that. But the legislature must be the ones that do that. The legislature must join the judges, must join the police, must join the community so they can do a plan. With this plan and understanding marijuana, at that moment in time, the money that the legislature will be able to use from taxing small amounts of marijuana for personal usage, we can use that money to invest in the criminal justice system and in individuals. How do we do that? One, looking at the sentences that individuals receive. Does the individual for marijuana can go ahead and maybe get a year? Why do we want to do that when this individual can be trained for job training, skill set, things like that? We need to make sure that we give businesses tax breaks and tax incentives to make sure that they can adequately train the individuals that from the criminal justice system that they also will believe in. We also talk about the bail industry and cash bail. Cash bail for some people is terrible, and for other people is great. It just depends how you look at it. I, for one, look at the system that you changed in 2017. The court made a ruling, and the judges don't look at cash bail as often as they used to. Unfortunately, in Baltimore City, that hasn't been the greatest thing in some ways. We have to have a system that invests in pre-trial supervision. What does that mean? That means that if an individual may not necessarily be released to the community, because when you're arrested, you go before the judge, the court, there are two things they'll look at. One, are you a flight risk? And two, are you a danger to the community? Depending on your charge. Well, the judge may wish to want to release you back to the community, but they don't know enough about you. So if they don't feel comfortable, they will incarcerate you. In Baltimore City, there's been an increase of 23.6% of the individuals been held since the new rule has been implemented. A number of these judges would gladly send you home on electronic monitoring if they have the opportunity. If we go ahead and legalize marijuana, and it's done properly through the General Assembly, and they can tax it, then that's the money that can be used for the pretrial incarceration programs that we would need to make sure that we can watch some of the nonviolent offenders. If you're violent, the judges aren't going to release you. That's just the way the system is. Now, what can we also do in terms of placing people in a position for success? I'm a very big believer on job skills. I'm a very big believer on training of jobs. But how do we do that? Once again, everything is about money, and everything is about making sure the system works properly. And what do we need to do? One, we can have the tax incentives to businesses that are willing to give individuals that have had prior convictions an opportunity and a chance. Number two, we can ask the legislature to think about the expungement of certain crimes after a certain time period. Number three, we can have more work release programs. There are programs that will sit down and give individuals who may have been convicted of some of the more nonviolent offenses that are doing prison sentences. We can give them the opportunity to have a work release a little sooner than, i.e., paroling out of prison. And we can really make sure, most of all, that we take chances on people. So now that we understand the history, now that we understand the opportunity, now that we have a plan, we must execute that plan. For many people, that sounds like, oh, that sounds great. I don't know how on earth we'd ever do that. Well, I want to tell you about an individual named Corey Warford. I couldn't be before you telling you about this plan if I had never done it. In 1992, Mr. Woolfolk lived in Park Heights. His name was Big Corey, and he ran a vicious drug gang in Park Heights. He was so vicious and his gang was so good at selling drugs, it caught the attention of the federal government. The federal government in 1992 put out a RICO indictment against Corey and his co-conspirators. They arrested him. He pled guilty and received 500 months to the federal penitentiary. 50 years. Corey, when he entered prison, I asked him what happened. He said, you know, when he got the 500 months, he felt that he deserved every single day of it because he knew what he was doing. Most of the people who are in the game and they're really doing the things out on the street, they'll tell you. They understand the rules. If they're doing violence, they recognize it comes a time that they must all sit down. He says he took him the first 2 or 3 years just trying to figure out how to survive. At 23 years of age, he went to prison. He liked school, and that was the key. He liked school. In 10th grade, Corey was a good student at Northwest High School. He was kicked out because he got caught with drugs. When he was kicked out, Corey decided he wanted his GED. So Corey ran the drug shop, and he told his partner, if you do the drug shop at night, I can go to school during the day. He signed up for his GED. GED takes usually about 6 months to complete. He told the man he had 90 days, he needed to hurry up and get back to work. Corey completed his GED in 40 days. He's in 10th grade still. But Corey liked school so much he signed up and went to the local community college. He was very intelligent, but he used that intelligence the wrong way. Like so many of our children, so many of our kids in school, they're very, very intelligent. We just haven't tapped into their skills. We haven't given them something to be excited about. We haven't connected the education piece with the life experience piece. Corey liked business, but he was in the wrong business. Corey was a leader, but he was leading people down the wrong path. When Corey took us 50 years, he took it. He began to understand what was going on, was with grown men, and he put his head in the books. He went from one prison to another prison. Eventually, he decided that I'm going to spend the rest of my life here. I need to figure something out. Every single day, Corey spent time in the law library. Every single day. Corey became so good and so proficient at the law that he applied and received a paralegal degree. Then he applied for another paralegal degree and was given that. Corey began to write briefs and memos for other people that were incarcerated. And writing the briefs and memos, they enjoyed it. And they were able to use this to get out of prison. Corey then wrote Judge Motz, who gave him the 50 years. And Judge Motz was so impressed that he brought him back. After 23 years and 6 months, Judge Motz released him. So Corey gets out. Corey and I have a mutual friend. The mutual friend reaches out to me and says, hey, I know you're looking for a paralegal that does federal work. Could you interview my friend? I said, fine. Corey comes to see me. And look, in 1992, I was in college. And I didn't remember what they were wearing in 1992. The same exact sweater that I had in 1992, Corey showed up to my office for a job interview. So I thought either Corey really doesn't have any new clothes because he's been in jail, or Corey just has the worst taste of clothes. As Corey comes to see me, Corey doesn't have a resume. I said, hey, I want your resume. He said, I don't have one. See, that's something we also have to remember because people have been incarcerated, they won't have resumes. But what Corey did have is he had a disc. He had the oral arguments of a brief that he had written. And I hear this voice bellowing, and I recognize that voice. That was the voice of our current city solicitor and former Fourth Circuit Judge, Andre Davis. Judge Davis says, wow, I really wish this young man was here. This is the best well-pled pro se litigant's brief I've ever read. It dealt with an issue post-conviction. Corey wrote a brief. The Fourth Circuit liked the brief, and they've changed the law of post-conviction in the Fourth Circuit. I gave Corey a job because I couldn't come before people and talk about changing people's lives and how the criminal justice system could be used properly if I didn't invest in someone. Gave Corey a job, and Corey's been with me for about 2 years. Corey is amazing. Corey would have been here today, but Corey got a brief he got to write tomorrow. Corey is amazing. We've taken cases, we've argued cases in front of the Fifth Circuit in New Orleans with big, complex tax litigation briefs. We've won a couple cases on the federal side, but we're not going to tell anybody because very few people won the federal side. I'm not trying to make them mad. And we've done and taken our game on a legal way to a whole nother level. And so what did I learn from Corey? I learned the most important to understand our history. We have to give opportunities. We have to have a plan, but we must execute it. If we believe in hope and we understand where we are, we can change what's going on in the criminal justice system. I believe in Corey, and I've seen the change in Corey's life. Where I think we are, if we really want to change our communities, we have to understand the change that's in all of our children. And just because they've made a wrong turn, or just because they've been incarcerated, or just because they've been given 50 years or 70 years, never stop believing in them, never make sure that they don't have hope. Because when you take hope away, we're doomed. Thank you very much.
Time for Q&A for Elizabeth?
I definitely have time for Q&A. Anybody have any questions?
Yes, thank you so much for everything you shared today. I want to ask, what is your stance on privatization of our jail system, which seems to, now that it's traded on the stock exchange, to incentivize getting bigger and bigger and bigger systems? You know, I know that for women, it's gone up 800% incarceration since 1980.
Well, it has. Part of that is because of the laws that we see, the conspiracy laws. Oftentimes what they're doing, the women may have a boyfriend or a husband involved in the drug game, and before you know it, they're part of the conspiracy because they're living in the same house, they're getting money. I am not for privatization of the prison system. I think that it's led to the explosion that we've seen. I think there are a number of things. I'm a big believer, if you're violent, we have to hold you accountable. A big believer. And I represent individuals. I'm going to fight hard for you. But the system is set up for checks and balance. I think if we can sit down, and one of the things we've been able to sit and see since the Justice Reinvestment Plan that Governor Hogan signed, I think we have 14 or 15 fewer people in state prisons right now since it's been implemented. The issue when you look at prisons a lot of times are mandatory minimum sentences. On the federal side, the president signed the First Step Act. The First Step Act has really changed a number of things on the federal side as opposed to state. The federal side doesn't have parole, and they have very few programs that you can participate in to allow you to get out of prison sooner. Under the First Step Act, they've now allowed a number of programs for nonviolent offenders. And so on the state side, I think the way that we're using the money can and will be redirected. But I think when you look at the pretrial incarceration period process, those are things that are very, very important. For instance, I believe in making sure we can have more pretrial, for instance, electronic home detention. In Maryland, if you're on electronic home detention pretrial, that goes towards your sentence. And so those are some of the things that are important. But, you know, really making sure that we have job training, job placement, making sure individuals can receive their GED. You have to put people in a position to be successful. Not everybody wants that, but you've at least, the system has to change the way in which we look at it into a punitive, just lock you up, throw away the key, forget about you. Because what you have now is the backlash, individuals coming home from prison that are not properly prepared for their future.
Ivan, retroactively, where do you see the laws about marijuana applying to those who are already convicted for small amounts of marijuana, and now that we're legalizing it medically and it will go elsewhere later on? What happens to those people who are in jail already? What do you think will happen? Well,
I think, in Maryland, just simple possession, they really weren't arresting in Baltimore that many people for simple possession of marijuana. The marijuana laws are tricky in the sense that the police have different tools within their toolbox that allows them what's called probable cause, reasonable articulable suspicion, to investigate to eventually make an arrest. One of the tools that they use is marijuana. There's a case, it's my case, State versus Greg Harding, which sits down and says that the police smell marijuana, that's probable cause to take you and do a strip search. We won on the state level, and then when we went to the Court of Appeals, we lost. And so what that says is that the police smell marijuana, they can search an individual to see if they smell more, because that makes the police believe criminal activity is potentially happening. Where do we go from there? So while it's important for the legislature to think about all this, to eventually make the changes, but to figure out and to give the police the tools so that they can understand how they're going to police properly. Because, you know, with marijuana, a lot of times officers will probably tell you 60 to 70% of some of the guns and drugs they find come also with the smell of the marijuana or the finding of the marijuana. So it's a balance in which you have to really study that process. And so, one, I believe that it will pass. I think there was a poll recently that 57% of all Marylanders would like marijuana, small amounts of marijuana, to pass. But the thing that's also important to remember is if it's done by the legislature, you've taken away the black market of the marijuana, and you're allowed then to have people go into stores that sell it legally, and that the product is legally produced the proper way. Right now, in the community, in the streets, they make marijuana and they lace it with fentanyl, spice, cocaine, heroin. So these are things where our client will get arrested and have marijuana, and they'll have the CDS analysis. I'll look, and the marijuana will have fentanyl laced in it. So these kids, i.e. the marijuana seems to be okay until you realize everything that it's laced with. That's why you have to do this with the legislature. And I do believe the legislature will pass. I believe, though, that not just marijuana, but a host of other nonviolent offenses, we need to make sure we can expunge to give people the freedom to change their life, to move on from their record, so it's not an albatross around their neck. On the federal side, if you have a conviction and you've been finished your parole and probation 10 years or more, the federal authorities don't count that against you. But on the state side, they do. So things like that we need to really change, and that's why I think we need to really have, take these ideas to the legislature in Annapolis. Yes?
On that same note, same vein with regard to marijuana. Now, I've been to tons of community meetings where the seniors say they can't sit on their porches anymore because people next door are smoking weed. I can't sit on my deck anymore because they're smoking weed next door. I'm inside of my house and the weed smell is on the inside of my house. Social Club Task Force goes out, and every club they go into, it reeks of marijuana. How do the police, you talk about the legislature, how do the police that quality of life? Because quite honestly, I don't like the smell of marijuana. It gets legalized, now folks can walk around, they can smoke weed. How do we deal with that from a quality of life space? People have a right to smoke, but quite honestly, I don't want to smell it. The seniors don't want to smell it. I don't even want to go into these clubs now because the owners can't control it. Some of the unintended consequences is we're now dealing with store owners, we're calling them problematic businesses, but all they're trying to do is run their business, but behaviors in their business that points to illegal activity. How do we get our arms around that?
Well, I think you have to look at marijuana very similar to cigarettes and for alcohol. For instance, you're going to have to retrain the police to spot an individual that's driving under the influence, not just alcohol, but of marijuana. I think, for instance, you can't smoke cigarettes in certain locations, certain places. I think those same rules must apply. I think the way, also one of the things that we have, there's going to be responsible drinkers, responsible marijuana smokers. One of my problems, I have friends that are teachers, and they say their kids are coming to school high. Mm-hmm. So we have to make sure that we find a way, if you're going to legalize it, then find a way in which we make sure that children are not participating in that activity still, just very similar to alcohol. That's why I say this isn't a quick, fast, let's jump out and do. This is, like right now, I believe it's in front of a committee down there in Annapolis where they're going to study it. You have to really study it. You have to roll it out in a way that everybody is together at one, because once we do, and I do feel that they probably will legalize it, because I think it'll probably come to the ballot initiative, and I think the voters will go ahead and have their say. And right now, if it's polling at 57%, I think there's a likelihood that it may pass. But I think at that moment in time, we will have had a year to 2 years to study, a year to 2 years to explain to the police the new way to police, and a year or 2 years for individuals to understand. We may just have to have either you smoke in your house, and you may be, and like for instance, in some jurisdictions, you're not allowed to smoke, Washington, D.C., you're not allowed to smoke marijuana in public. So things like that are the ways I think we'll go ahead and study it to make sure that you don't trample on other individuals' rights, but also allow people to legalize this product.
No one else has a question. I have a follow-up. Yes. I want to go to illegal guns. You know, when you look at illegal guns in our city, most of the crimes that are committed in our city, gun violence, is with illegal guns. If I'm not mistaken, Chicago is beating us. New York is beating us when it comes to gun violence, illegal guns. How do we? Why is it that people that go before the court, a lot of times they plea out and they don't get a jury trial? What is happening in the court system, in the criminal justice system? Because I hear time and time again, the police continue to lock up the same people, and the same people continue to get out and commit the same crimes over and over and over again. And that sometimes is, if I was a police officer, that would be very disheartening, because it's like cat chase mouse. You know, who gets caught today?
That's an interesting question. I get that all the time. I always ask. I was in church yesterday, and that's all people want to talk about, that and marijuana. Let me give a quick breakdown of how the court system works. When an individual is arrested, they have their charges, go before the judge. Judge may give them bail, may not give them bail. Let's say handgun. In Baltimore City right now, 90% of the people arrested with a handgun are not getting out on bail. You're just not getting out on bail. So then when you go to court, judges don't have a say in what charges are called. For instance, you're in a car, where can you transport a handgun, but you could be a prior felon. You know, you could have 3 or 4 different charges for this one handgun. The state's attorney's office is the one that decides what count to charge, what count to call. In 2015, there was a court case that pretty much said judges really can't give the sentences like they used to before. Judges were the ones who controlled that whole process in the past. In 2015, the case law changed, and it pretty much says that the state's attorney's office has the policy and the power to decide what counts to call, and also the sentence. For instance, as a defense attorney, my client has a handgun, more likely than not, I'm taking it to the circuit court. Why? Because the district court judge is there. They have only so many cases, and district court judge is probably going to give you more jail time than the circuit court judge, to be honest. By the time we get to the circuit court may have 25, 30 cases for this one judge. State's attorney may have 10 or 15 of those cases. If it's just simple possession of a handgun, state's attorney is trying to figure out where are their witnesses, where are their officers, what's going on, and they may want to postpone it, they may not want to postpone it. Now, I've had this case probably at least 60, 90 days. I'm going to be prepared to go to trial. State's attorney's office may not be prepared to go to trial. The judge is going to send us to go to trial. Because the judge, their job is to move the cases along, and if they want a trial, to go to trial. Because remember, my person with his handgun's been sitting in jail. So if you're in jail, judge is ready, I'm ready, finding out a lot of times the state's not ready, they don't have their officers, they never spoke to their officers, because it goes from one prosecutor to another prosecutor into the case. But let's say the state's ready, everybody's ready to go to trial. At that moment in time, if my client has a prior felony drug conviction, then they're called a felon in possession of a handgun. The minimum mandatory is 5 years without the possibility of parole. My client is really not worried about the state. They're worried about the feds, because the feds are going to take their case because they're felons. If I, as a defense attorney, can convince the state's attorney to allow my client to plead to just having possession of the handgun, which is a 5-year sentence, prohibited person is a 5-year sentence, my client will take that plea every day. Why? Because under the Justice Reinvestment Act, he only has to do a third of a sentence, which means he'll be home in a third of 5 years. That's not the judge's fault. But then the other thing that I've also noticed with the judges is that sometimes the judges will want to give a sentence, will say, hey, Mr. Bates, I'm thinking I'll make state's postponement request. Your client, go ahead and take 3 years, misdemeanor handgun, 3 years, suspend all but 6 months. Yeah, my client would take that. Because if they go to trial, they're going to get more time. The judge sees that what's happening. So the judge is trying to step in to say, you know what, at least let me put this person on probation so I can monitor them. And so, you know, the criminal justice system is complicated. It's not as easy as it seems. Once you're in and you understand how the system works, then you see things happen from different points of views. Remember, the judge is only the referee. It's like you lose the game, you want to blame the ref. You don't blame the ref. If the state loses, it's probably because of the defense attorney, or for whatever reason they weren't prepared. At the end of the day, it's the state's case. The state charges, the state decides only the counts. I may not want my client to plead to the count. You know, I may want my client to plead to a misdemeanor, but if the state says we're only going to go on the count where they can go to jail 5 years without the possibility of parole, there's nothing I can do, and there's nothing the court can do. Which means if they plead guilty to that count, the court must give them 5 years without the possibility of parole, which means they're going to do a minimum of 36 months to 40-some months in prison.
Yeah, just real quick, just trying to shut up and not say anything. I just wanted your opinion, because clearly, you know, when we talk about policing, prosecuting, judicial, and I love them all, oftentimes we're not on the same page, or it appears we're not on the same page, and even on prosecution, I mean, not prosecution, but defense. There are those cases, and I just, from your opinion, where might be some of the breakdown, and where could we coexist and co-jail, co-op better together? We think about a case not too long ago, just a few months ago, where kids got locked up for a handgun. I hear what you're saying, 90% of them don't come at home, but there are some breakdowns in time. Kid gets locked up, and then he's released. Judge release him, and I'm not blaming, I'm not pointing fingers. I just want to get your opinion. And then the police shoot him the very next day, shoot and kill him. Right? I mean, you know the case.
Yeah.
So where are some of the breakdowns you think where we can do better as a co-op, all of us, right, working together, so we don't have those kind of breakdowns? Because that's where the public screams and shouts and says, and the police will jump up and down if they don't really understand it, where we are pointing the finger at one another, saying it's your fault, it's your fault, it's your fault, and we're not working together.
Well, that's why, to me, pre-trial home detention, I think that helps a lot in the sense that the judge that may have wanted to release this young man or young lady because they have no criminal record, never been involved, you're willing to take a chance on that person. If you send them home on electronic monitoring, you know where they are 24/7. They're in a house at that moment in time. They're understanding what's going on. But one of the problems I think we have now is you have a lot of overworked prosecutors. They're really young. You have a lot of overworked officers. For instance, a number of retirements. So the police force isn't there. You've lost a lot of experience. A number of prosecutors have left the state's attorney's office as well, so they don't have that relationship. The entire criminal justice system is built on relationships. Point blank in discussion. It's all about the relationship. So for instance, as a brand new prosecutor, I was in Southwest District. So when I was a prosecutor in Southwest District, I had the phone number of all my officers. So by the time I moved to felony, if I had a witness that I couldn't find that was in Southwest District, I called one of my old officers in the drug unit because they knew everybody. See, you don't have that relationship anymore. And because you don't have that relationship, no one knows whom to call. And so, when we sit down, and they talk about with victims and witnesses. Victim and witnesses, you don't have those problems on the federal side for a number of reasons. But once again, it's the relationship. The prosecutors have so many cases that they haven't had the opportunity to build the relationships with the witnesses. Once the murder happens, once they're a witness, you bring them in, you sit them down, you talk to them, you allow them to be in a safe space, and you explain the process to them. When I was a prosecutor, I had good relationships with my victims, our families members, and the witnesses in my cases, even the violent ones. It has to go through relationships. That's the only way you're going to really fix what's going on. And within the criminal justice system, as soon as you have a relationship with the prosecutor, with the police, from there, the police are like, you know what? Hey, you know what? I know Ivan, he really needs this witness for this murder. Police don't want to see the murder in Southwest either. They don't want that person coming back. And if you have that relationship, then they know who the witness is, and they're like, look, Mr. Johnson, we found you, et cetera, et cetera. Because a lot of the witnesses are people who may be involved in the game as well, and they may know and see them. Yes.
Do you find, or is it your opinion that, like you mentioned that prosecutors have so many cases and, they're not always prepared. Do you think by decriminalizing marijuana or changing, the prosecution process, the pretrial process, that these prosecutors will be more accurate with whom they, incarcerate because they'll have less cases?
No, we're talking about decriminalizing misdemeanor. Misdemeanor marijuana is only 500 arrests the whole year. So the senior prosecutors, they don't have those. Those are brand new prosecutors that have those cases. So the only thing that's going to help the prosecution is experience, and the only way you get experience is time. And so that's the only thing that you're going to have. There's been a number of prosecutors have left that office, but the experience and the time, when you're a prosecutor, you have to learn everything from the beginning, where to stand in court, how to make the objection, how to reach out to your witnesses, how to prepare the case, what defense attorneys, look, I'm a defense attorney, we have certain tricks we're going to do, because my job as a defense attorney isn't to allow you to convict my client, my job is to defend my client to the best of the ability. So, I may know that you didn't say something that you needed to say to put this piece of evidence in evidence. I'm going to object. The judge may know, I may know, and you may never. We had a case once, the state forgot to talk about the handgun, on a handgun case. They forgot to identify my client as the person who had the gun. So I sat there with the state, finished this case. I made my motion because they never identified my client. Judge looked at me, looked at the state, just shook their head and had to grant the motion. So that's terms of experience.
About these relationships, and you're saying that the only way we can improve this process is with time. But I live in Baltimore. Never had time.
I'm
just saying.
I agree. I think it's time. I think it's training. I think it's all those things. There's a natural process. I think it's very frustrating for the people that are involved in the criminal justice system because we do see what's going on. We see what's happening. As a defense attorney, I live in the city too. And then sometimes I shake my head at things that I see. But at the end of the day, I think we have to support the people who are there. We have to support the process. They get better. I see younger prosecutors. I see them getting better. I see them working hard on their craft. And that's really, where we are. But I think when you have the relationship with the police department and the prosecutors, they're able to coexist and help each other build stronger cases. Because, for instance, a younger prosecutor, a younger officer makes an arrest, they think their case is finished, but they don't know the other things that they need to do to continue to follow up. I think with BPD, there are a number of issues that are going on, and when they figure out some of the things that are happening, and they have some of the units back up to speed, and they can start to do things. For instance, there used to be a whole set of officers that would focus on some of the robberies and burglaries and breaking in, and now they have that back to the patrol officers because they're so strung out in terms of officers being in other jurisdictions for other things, that it's a process where we're trying to dig out this hole, where we have to kind of understand the system so we can dig out it together. With that, I did want to say, most of all, I want to thank you, Bernard, so much for inviting me, having me here. I wanted to invite you, thank you, Peter and Pat Tandle, thank you very much for having me. I want to thank the students. I want to thank the judges. I want to thank all the supporters and everybody else who was here. The criminal justice system is very complicated, but it's a system that if we are able to invest, I have no doubt it will make our city a lot better. Thank you very much.
I want to take a few minutes just to thank Ivan for his well-prepared remarks and timely remarks in light of a lot that's going on here in Baltimore and the nation for that matter. But before I invite Carl Stokes to come up and represent Mr. Handel to say goodbye, I want Jack Nestor to stand up, please. And Jack, I forgot to recognize you in the beginning. Now I want you to have special recognition. Will everybody give me a round of applause, please? I want to thank Peter and Pat for hosting this for the 13th time. And now I invite Carl Stokes, my colleague, to come up and wrap up for us. Thank you all for coming. This has been a great event for us once again, and you made it happen. Your presence makes it happen.
Thank you, Frank.
Thanks, Bernard. Glad to see y'all judges, of course, always. Thank you for being here. And Ivan, thank you. As you were speaking, especially those startling statistics of African Americans who are such a large portion of criminal, of the incarceration, rather. It reminded me many years ago, 2 or 3 decades ago, a comment of Richard Pryor. Those of us of a certain age enjoyed Richard's humor and his imbuing of truth into much of his humor. He had just spent a day in court for his own case, but he heard many cases that were going on prior to his being called before the bench. At the end of the day, Richard Pryor came out of the courthouse and said, I just experienced the criminal justice system. I now know what criminal justice is in America, just us. And again, even then, and as you know, not to go off on my tangent, that the 13th Amendment abolished slavery with one exception. Those who were convicted of a crime could still be enslaved, and they were. So Pat and Peter have done this, as Bernard mentioned, 13 times. And this is just a great moment to do this. Their corporate responsibility doesn't stop at the tenancy of those who are on this campus. But as you know, or may not know, they have made sure that those wonderful murals across the street from Tom Miller continue to be maintained, continue to be there so others can enjoy Tom's work. And a couple of homes across the street have been removed so that a park for the citizens can also be there. So we're glad all of that is going on. I just want to also mention, on behalf of Peter and Pat, that they're glad that so many have come out each year. We do have lunch, and it's a great box lunch that's in the next room. We want to make sure that everyone does get and enjoy the lunch that is here. This is the wonderful, you didn't mention this wonderful lady who founded this great American Visionary Museum. Rebecca Hopberger is with us. And last thing, Peter, this is a longer speech than you would have given. But we wanted to thank everyone. But I just want to mention Robert Stokes, Councilman Stokes, who's no relation, except when he does really great stuff. Robert was at St. Francis Xavier, the church I worship, and yesterday he was visiting and speaking to the young people there. And Robert said something so important. He mentioned to the young people that there are many national heroes that are spoken about during Black History Month. But he mentioned there are so many heroes right here in East Baltimore that those young people could get inspiration from, whether it's Reginald Lewis, whether it's Mac Lewis, whether it's the Cooper family who started the Avalon Shoe Company, whether it's B. Gaddy, whether it's Dew Burns, the first African-American mayor, and many others that are still alive now, besides those I just mentioned, who could be so inspirational to all of us right now to honor the living history we have. And much of that you can also see across the street at the Great Blacks and Wax Museum. So I didn't mean to give a plug, but it's out. That's good. so Pat and Peter, again, thank you all for coming out. Make sure you get lunch, and we'll see you next year, hopefully. God bless.
It became tougher, and we're seeing, I think the for-profit jail system is really bad stuff, because a job of a for-profit a company is to get bigger and bigger and bigger. And who could be better than docile, drug users? That's where you saw that Kids for Cash stuff that went to the extreme. For jaywalking, they were putting kids, in jail for, and this neighborhood is palpably better because they're here. And so is actually lots of stuff in Maryland. And John, I'm just a big admirer of you, as you know, of just, you are the easiest interviewer I've ever, and I get interviewed all the time, but through Loretta's company, and certainly, and Lou of blessed memory, who is just a treasured human being. It is always a pleasure to see you. And I'm going to hear you on the radio still, right?
Yes, you will.